why do we learn? What do we learn? And how do we apply what we learn in the real world? These were some of the questions I wanted to answer when I started this podcast. This is an audio and video show where I interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, I interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, I hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. I'm really excited for today's episode. The guest we're interviewing today is Zain Memon. A little bit about Zain before we jump into this conversation. Memon is a transmedia storyteller, producer, and media tech specialist. He has produced the critically acclaimed movies and films An Insignificant Man and OK Computer. He has run the three largest crowdfunding campaigns out of India, as well as the world's largest open source film project, Ship for Thesis. Zain has launched India's first VR journalism platform with Else VR. He's now co-creating a massive transmedia narrative universe where he's producing films, graphic novels, gaming platforms, and amazing board games. Zain is also the creator of two popular and award-winning board games, SHASN and SHASN Azadi, which I personally love. I will be linking all the videos that Zain has already put up and spent a lot of time on related to SHASN as a game. Today we're focused on Zain's thoughts and Zain's story, but his thoughts on a few set of questions that I'm really curious about, and I think he has a really interesting perspective on. So Zain, to get this interview started, the first question I want to ask you is, why do humans learn? And if you can throw some light on this question by talking about your experience. In another interview, I remember you telling me that when you were younger, your brother used to read to you a lot. And, at a certain point of time, you also decided to create your own university experience by dropping out of school. So, why do you think humans learn? And what was your experience in the educational system?
Thank you so much, Abhishek. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I was really excited to talk to you, and I'm so glad it's finally happened. Uh, that's a very deep and important question. Why do we learn? Well, I'm going to zoom out as I always do, or try to do, and let's look at the human condition and humans as a species on the whole. Uh, Evolution is has been a traditional way any species to learn. A species does something, and through natural selection that something's either good for the species on the whole, or it's bloodline, or it's not. The things that benefit its bloodline are rewarded. The things that are not are subsequently discarded, and that's the learning process, a genetic learning process. But something happened with humans that allowed us to punctuate, allowed us to become so much more uh, resilient and powerful and impactful than any other species that we have known of, which is that forget horizontal, forget vertical gene transfer, forget horizontal gene transfer. We were able to transmit everything that we learned in our lives to everyone around us, regardless of the slowness and the tardiness of our genetic structure. What do I mean by that? I mean that we could take an idea from our head. It could be as simple as how to hunt a wildebeest or how to pick a mushroom that is not poisonous, and not have to wait tens of generations for that to become wisdom and information in the genetic sense, and just write a book about it, tell someone about it with words. uh, this ability to store information, this ability to arrive at insights, this ability to uh, take what we have in our own experience and transmit it to other people, and in turn learn from other people's experiences is learning. We learn fundamentally because that it is the greatest tool that we have been allowed. It will or everything that we know profoundly and sometimes even know emotionally, and transmit it to the person we love or care for. As a matter of fact, sometimes we don't even need to directly transfer our wisdom somewhere else. They can just watch us and learn. And that's why we learn. And nature has, of course, over the last few generations or last few 100,000 years or million years, incentivized the ability to learn. And when I say incentivize the ability to learn, this is how nature does it. If you do something that's good for you, let's say you run into a forest. This is before humans discovered agriculture, and you found some carbs. It could be an apple, it could be a mushroom, and you eat it. Your body incentivizes you for eating more carbs, for eating more fruit by releasing neurotransmitters, chemicals like serotonin, and saying, "This is good, do more of this." Those are the reinforcements, those are the strategies that the human brain, the human genome uses to incentivize you to do things that are good for you. But therein lies the problem. Because we find ourselves in very, very different environments now. We find ourselves in an eventuality, in a possibility that perhaps uh, there is such a thing as too much sugar, which was an absolute absurdity in forest and savanna environments. So body says if sugar, then good. But at the same time, the genetic code, which is very, very efficient and doesn't have any dead code, or tries not to have dead, has lots of vestiges, but tries to not have any dead code, uh, never imagined that too much sugar will be bad. That eventuality never happened. So now we have if sugar, then good, to add infinitum, and we have strawberry cheesecakes, which are 1500 calories per bite. So we have our own biological ways of learning incentives, but those also need to be checked because we find ourselves in very, very different learning environments.
Yeah. And like, Zain, like primarily, if you think about the structures we have in place now, so we have a K-12 school system, and then we have universities in place.
Uh-huh.
So a majority of us go through these two structures. And in terms of the experiences that you have, I remember you saying that a large part of your work is creating simulations of the real world through, board games or movies, so people can experience these simulations and maybe better understand the real world out there. So when you were a student at school, what were some things you observed as a student about how this structure was designed? And if you had to design a school for yourself today, for the young Zain Memon from like grade 1 to grade 12, what would that school look like?
It's a very interesting question. When I talk about my journey as a creator, there are a few first principles that really, really helped me perhaps do whatever little I've been able to do. Uh, and I'm in the process of translating them, collecting them, collating them, and being able to translate them to everyone in the next generation. I know I sound old when I say that, but uh, the most the most imperative thing that we have to learn how to do, and it might sound pathological, but is to learn itself. The context that you are trying to that we will be in changes. The the environment that we will find ourselves in the future will change drastically. When I grew up, the internet wasn't a thing. It is something that some people had. Soon the internet happened. And when the internet happened, soon after that, Google happened. And our learning journeys were, hey, can you memorize this? But now Google has been able to take that need for storing information for most part out of you. You don't need to store information the way you did. Uh, and the quiz show format hence dies out. Because is that really intelligence? Something else can do that for you. It's problem solving now. It's being able to connect disparate thoughts. But then, and as kids, we remembered phone numbers, our friends' phone numbers. Now we don't, because storage is not important anymore. And then came ChatGPT. We, at no point in our lives, thought that a transformer this strong, an LLM this strong, could exist in our lifetime. And by all measures, the first ChatGPT that dropped that blew our minds is now obsolete. And it's been 18 months. In the next 6 months, something else will happen that will make something else obsolete. So we are finding ourselves in scenarios, in places where the things we train for perhaps don't need training for to begin with. Perhaps you don't need to be an artist. To be an artist, you don't necessarily need to know how to wield the brush perfectly, but you need to know how to create a composition that will emotionally move someone, that will capture everything you want to say in a single icon. And that's a different skill entirely from spending 10 years on mastering oil on canvas. Perhaps you don't need to do that anymore. Uh, one one good way of making sure that what you are learning is of value, and what you are learning will be of value to the people around you is just following a principle of utility. I'm a self-proclaimed utilitarian. I try to find utility in everything I do, and more on that later. But there are a million problems in the world. All of us are unhappy about something. All of us are deeply, deeply bothered by something or the other. Find what that thing is. Uh, Look at the future and see where you would like the future of the world to be in, and then reverse engineer steps to get there.
Hmm.
And those steps of reverse engineering of solving that problem that really, really bothers you is your employment, is the utility you will provide to the world. And
Hmm.
now, understand what skills do I need to be able to solve that problem. And perhaps that is the ideal education journey for you.
Hmm.
So, if I were to go back in time and tell a younger myself how to learn, I wouldn't tell them to read this or study that. I would tell them to be just very, very intentional with what they want to do with their lives, what utility they want to provide for their lives, and then find out what the solution to that problem is, and then equip yourself to solving that solution. There's an old adage, right? You give a man a fish, he dies. Teach a man how to fish. I think that's wrong.
Hmm.
Teach a man to learn, well, otherwise he'll die in a desert because there's no fish.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, because
Uh,
like
yeah, go on.
Go ahead, Zainul, because I think like learning for a fisherman and learning for like a programmer would be two very different things, right? And in
Uh-huh.
both their context, they're equally valuable skills, right? But I think what you are referring to here is the fact that once you understand the end goal, you are able to reverse engineer it a lot quicker. But a lot of people may not have that clarity, right? At that early stage, right?
The clarity, I'm not asking you to be specific. I'm asking you to be, okay, I don't like the way governments function, or I don't like the state of my Android phone. I just think it's ugly.
Correct.
Fine. How do you think it can be better? Okay. Now equip yourself to make it better. It's as simple as that. Find a problem in the world that you think is worth solving, and then figure out how you can be the best solution provider for that problem. I was telling you I'm a utilitarian, and that puts me in a very, very precarious situation because I am a utilitarian, but I'm not at the same time. I make films and games, and I write books. Does anything I do provide any utility for anyone? Is a question. Is my work of any impact? Is a question I wake up with every day. Uh, and we always try to find importance, find purpose in the things we are doing. Otherwise, just getting out of bed in the morning seems impossible. Uh, and I'm reminded of two stories that changed all our lives. The first story was about this noble ruler of a faraway kingdom. That noble ruler of a faraway kingdom came to his people and he said, "There is a very big bad enemy in a few seas away from us. That enemy has a weapon, and that weapon is enough to destroy all of us. Before that enemy deploys that weapon, we must go into his kingdom and destroy him." That ruler was George Bush talking about Saddam Hussein, saying Saddam Hussein had WMDs. They went, they attacked, but no WMDs were found. We were told a story, and that story led to millions of lives being completely altered for the worse. So stories, I realized, can have negative impact. But what about positive impact? Are there examples of positive impact? And for that, I'm just this small story I read about Swati Mohan. Swati Mohan landed the Mars rover and piloted the Mars rover out of NASA. And when asked what got her to do this, she said as a child she saw Star Trek. And she said, I want to do that.
Hmm.
And I think that's profound, that you can tell a story that can inspire a young person to work for 20 years and really change humans on a multi-planetary scale.
Yep.
And that really, really is what gets me out of bed in the morning, stories like these. So yes, perhaps there's, and again, these, when I got into this, I knew why I wanted to do what I wanted to do, but it wasn't so profound, it wasn't so articulated, it wasn't so clear. That clarity comes with time. But one thing that I kept doing, and one thing everyone around us keeps doing, is Okay, this is what I need to create. What are the skills I require to be able to create this? And that's my learning journey more than anything else.
Amazing, Zain. Like, I'd like to maybe talk to you a little more about this idea of stories. I remember you saying that stories are like non-genetic data points we share, right?
Yes.
We share this with the next generation. And if you think about the stories that have come out of Memesys Culture Lab, like An Insignificant Man, or your work with Else VR, or with
Mhm.
SHASN as a political board game, like, and even Ship of Thesis, or a lot of the projects, right?
Mhm.
The stories are so complex. There's politics, there's human lives, there is sociology, there's history. So, like, in terms of the stories that inspired your thinking, like, what were some stories that really stuck with you when you were growing up? And why do you think humans even tell stories? I think you've already spoken about it a bit, but maybe tell me a little bit about stories that really stayed with you when you were growing up.
Well, there are far too many stories for me to count, and I'm a little lost for examples right now.
Yeah.
But the reason we tell stories is, like I mentioned earlier, is to be able to translate information to each other uh, in a much faster way than our genes would allow. Uh, but for stories to be heard and stories to be enjoyed, the stories themselves have to be entertaining. Now let's zoom in on that word a little. Entertaining. What is entertainment? The same way I spoke about how sugar feels good and sugar makes you happy. Entertainment is basically a story making you happy or a story keeping you engaged. Now, what are these stories and why do stories keep you engaged? For the same reason that people who heard stories and learned from stories faster were, were basically better suited to react to stimulus when it happened to them the next time. They learn from other people's experiences. But what happened is the stories that our brain incentivizes, the stories that our brain tells us are good for us, are also obsolete. There used to be a time when mating partners were scarce. If you lost one mating partner, it is quite possible that your genetic code died out, and hence the most jealous genetic code survived, which ensured that they had mating partners. But there are more than 8 billion people in the world right now. If your girlfriend dumps you, uh, you're quite likely going to find someone. I'm not saying the heartache is nothing. That is profound. But you are going to find someone else, and you are most likely going to pass on your genetic code. So the pain you feel is not real, and hence the relatability you feel when a story of heartbreak is also not real. Similarly, when someone else came to your farm and took your food away, you would have died of hunger. So stories of war, of defense, of kinship, of keeping a kin safe, of violence were very, very important at one point. Saying if the stories when the moral was, if someone takes your food, slap them, take your food back. If someone does something wrong to you, take it back from them. We don't live in that world anymore. We have entire judicial systems. We have entire legal frameworks that allow us to make sure that our resources are not taken from us. At the same time, we have enough resources for everyone to have. But our brain is still incentivizing the classical stories of violence and mating rituals. We don't need that anymore. But that is what we find entertaining. How do I create something else that my brain finds entertaining? And one good way of doing that is hijacking. Taking the same trigger points of a love story, taking the same trigger points of an action film, but telling something else. If you look at Khushbu and Vinay's work with An Insignificant Man, it's a documentary without interviews. It's a documentary where no one is coming and telling you like a classroom lecture, this is what happened. It unfolds like a thriller. It
Mm.
unfolds like these protagonists have their entire life dependent on what they are doing, and the tempo, the editing, the direction, everything uses every tool in their arsenal of a thriller to tell you a story about democracy.
Yeah.
Same thing with Tumbad. Tumbad uses when Anand directed Tumbad, he was very clear that he wanted to tell the story of patriarchy, and horror was a medium of seeing it. He was hijacking horror to talk
Mm.
about patriarchy and parochialism. So we tell stories, we find stories entertaining. How do we make more relevant stories entertaining is the entire inquiry that we have dedicated ourselves to at Memesis and Department of Lore Studios.
Yeah, and like, maybe like I'd like to know a little bit about Memesis and the people that you founded it with, and I've heard Anand speak before as well, and I'm
Uh-huh.
I'm really intrigued by how your group thinks and how you came together, because there's a lot of diverse skill sets that you've brought together, in that core team, and the way you formed like a group and the
Mm.
projects that you've come, it's so untraditional. Because, and what is traditional? We often look at a production house only producing movies, but you all produce board games, you all produce films, you all produce virtual reality projects. So when did Memesis first form, and what was the story behind that organization, and what is your
Sure.
vision for the long term?
Uh, so this is again, like I said earlier, we imagined the future and we reverse engineer a step from that. The future was this: that India could create tools of enlightenment, India could create media, India could create culture on a global stage that could translate the greatest breakthroughs of science and philosophy and make them into entertaining capsules of media. To do that, you needed to get the economics in place, you need to get the infrastructure in place, and you needed to most importantly get the people in place, the talent in place. What does that mean? It means that you need to spend a lifetime or a few lifetimes just training, just honing your craft. Uh, when I make games in India, I don't have a earlier generation of game designers to go to learn from. So what I will do will always uh, be be held back by the community I found myself in. But perhaps the next generation will have me and a few other people like me who have created games who they can learn from. Every time someone wants to do something in this country, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So what we are doing is inventing the wheels for this part of the world. Uh, and I have many friends in media, and everyone has the problem of survival versus creating what they truly want to create. And pragmatism and responsibility always dictates that you create for survival. And hopefully, at some point, you pivot and you make things that you really want to make. That never happens. Sadly, it's never happened. Any studio that has created things that are for the market or second guessing the market or are in any which way compromise on what they actually believe in continues to do that for the rest of its life, because that is what the DNA is trained for. But DNA, I mean organizational DNA. It always becomes publish or perish, and that is fundamentally flawed. So we took the difficult route while everyone around us had the responsibility had responsibilities. They also had the opportunities of earning a lot of money for doing a lot of work that they didn't believe in.
Hmm.
We didn't have that. We found people, we found each other, most importantly, through just coincidence, through happenstance. We made hundreds of people, but we held on to the people that we really think thought were our kin, and created an infrastructure where everyone could grow together. Sometimes the growth was slow, sometimes it was punctuated, uh, and we fundamentally allowed them to create what they wanted to create. And sorry, give me 1 second. 1 second, 1 second. I'm sorry, there's some disturbance at the door.
No worries,
Unplanned.
no worries.
Yeah.
Like, I can
I'm
just
just
edit
going to
this,
continue.
so
Yeah.
that's okay.
You can hopefully, if edits an issue, just send the files to me. I edit them for you.
No worry at
Don't
all.
worry. Yeah. And we also through that earned the privilege of a community that was brutally honest to each other. We loved and cared for each other, but at the same time, we created a space for each other that allowed us to be honest. That hey, you made something, and I know it really matters to you, but it's not landing, it's not working. And we lost some friends in that process, and we gained some in that process. But what we have is now a system of building things that more often than not are really, really robust, really, really beautiful. And hopefully we will keep creating that. Hopefully we will keep creating things that really matters to us. uh, and lots of people have passed through our doors and have created things that really inspire us. And hopefully by the time we are at the end of our career, we'll have created an ecosystem that more creators can build off.
So right now in Memesis, it's like how many people are in your team and what kind of people, normally, can apply or work with Memesis? Like, are you just looking at like board game designers and filmmakers, or are you open as an organization to people from other fields coming in and, maybe building projects with you as well?
Firstly, there are two studios are run, Memesis and Department of Lore.
Got it.
Department of Lore is a new studio. We haven't formally announced it yet,
Okay.
but Anand and I co-founded it to create something that I'll talk about with you later.
Yeah.
But we have perhaps one trained filmmaker in the company and zero trained game designers.
Wow.
People apply to us because they like our work and tell us, hey, these are the skill sets I bring to the table. They might be an architect, they might be an industrial designer, they might be like there's one film student in our company who actually makes games and doesn't do
Hmm.
film.
Got it.
They might write. What we are looking for is people who are ready to put in the grind and build something that is deep and profound and is okay with the time it takes. If
Hmm.
you feel that you're going to create something that will change the world in 6 months, you're wrong.
Hmm.
If you feel it's only ideas that will change the world, again, you are wrong. Ideas are dime a dozen.
Yep.
It's execution that matters. So people who can bring a skill set to the table and put their head down and execute things beautifully are people that we're looking for. And you're constantly on the lookout for new talent and talent that can inspire us, talent that can amaze us. That's how I joined. That's how some of the strongest core team members joined. They just said, "Hey, I want to work with you guys." They put the
Hmm.
hours in and have now created things that we are all proud of.
That's amazing because it looks like y'all have an entire ecosystem with, how the way y'all are producing things. I'm a big fan of the lab and, I always follow y'all on social media, but it just looks like it's a much bigger organization. And hearing you, I'm just amazed that so few people are actually producing things at such a high quality, and in such a small pace. I mean, there must be something you're doing right in the ecosystem there. And
We keep constantly feeling that we don't produce fast enough, but
just,
hopefully next year we have 3 games and 2 books coming out.
wow, awesome. And that's going to be like a graphic novel, or is that
One graphic novel and one novel.
perfect? So, like with SHASN and SHASN Azadi Zain, like, just to
Uh,
give you a little background, I was in Bahrain when the Arab Spring happened, right? And I remember playing the game and I realized there were things I did not notice when I was in the Arab Spring that came
mhm.
up when I was, engaged in your game,
Uh-huh.
right? Because when I was in that ecosystem, there were some things I could not discuss being an outsider. I was an immigrant in a Middle Eastern country. So there were some things that, you couldn't discuss in certain ecosystems,
Mhm.
and I've growing up, I've always been, I've always struggled with this idea of politics,
Mhm.
because immediately when I tell someone I'm on the right or I'm on the left, there's a judgment and sort of an argument coming in about why you are doing that. And
Mhm.
eventually I, refrain from, depending on who I'm discussing with, I don't feel like I'm very comfortable sharing my political stance because for me, I think it's more policy based. Like certain policies I'm on the left, certain policies I'm on the right, and I think it's really important to look at a politician or a political sort of campaign from those perspectives. I may be wrong, which
No,
I'm
I completely
completely
agree with you. I completely agree with you that we need to remove the personality from the politics
correct.
and talk about the
And
policies. At the same time, and just one thought over there is, when you next time you start a political conversation with your friends, your family, let's not talk about the policy. Let's first talk about, okay, what does the future look like?
hmm,
Does everyone have equal rights? Okay, everyone doesn't have equal rights. Women have fundamentally lesser rights, if someone might argue. Why? Because policy is just is just the blueprint to reach there.
hmm.
Where is the question? Yeah,
So
sorry.
yeah, because that keeps it open, right? Rather than jumping in and like, defining things. I think
Mhm.
it sort of creates some common core values that all of us can have a discussion on, right?
Yes, and I don't think we all have common core values, and that's also
Mm.
okay.
Yeah,
uh, we need we need mimetic variation for multiple strategies to be tried out. No one, I don't think anyone has the right answer of where civilization should head. It's an experiment at the end of the day. But let's talk about the end goal first, and
yeah.
then talk about, okay, if these are the end goals, what are the best strategies slash policies to reach there?
Got it. Got it. Like, and like when I was looking at SHASN as a game, right? I think it's
Mhm.
so amazing because it's like a simulation for the real world, right? You have
Uh-huh.
these politicians with four different perspectives of looking at the world, and I'm trying to grab voters. And there were times when I was in the game, I realized that I was taking on the stance of someone who I would maybe not support as a voter. But in that context, I realized that I just had to take that stance because that was what was needed in that particular moment. So
Mhm.
Shasan, just correct me if I'm wrong with, I mean, if I'm wrong with the dates. It released in 2019, Zain?
It got announced in 2019. We first shipped in 2021.
Got it. And Shasan Azadi, when did that come out?
That announced 2021 ships this week.
Oh, wonderful. So,
Yeah.
like I'm just like these two games, you launched like two of India's biggest like Kickstarter campaigns, right?
Mhm.
So, since when were these games in development in your mind? How long did it take? And, firstly, I want to commend you on how amazing the box is and, all the pieces. I think like I would just pay for the beauty of the way you've designed that, right? And
Thank
I've
you so
seen
much.
many reviews of it as well. It's just a high quality game that I think is on par with a lot of international games I've played as well. So,
Mhm.
when did the idea first emerge? How did you design the setup, and how did you get it out into the world?
So
Focused
it
on
was,
Shas in
yeah,
particular.
SHASN in 2020, in 2019, 2018, we started designing it in the first week of Feb. We didn't know what we were doing. It was the first game ever, and we hadn't thought of this particular game ever before that. By the time it was 20, by the time it was May 2020, May 29, 2018, 3 months later, we had moved to Goa, all of us, the entire studio from Bombay. And when we moved to, I remember carrying in my hand the first prototype of the game. So the game was ready in 2018 May. Till July, August, we fine tuned it, some balance changes, all of that. And then came the more difficult part, which was understanding the industry. Because of lack of ecosystem, I was not only the game designer, but I was also the publisher, which basically meant I had to figure out visual design, branding, marketing, manufacturing, sales, delivery, customer support, all of that. And that took me a year to figure out the machinery. Kickstarter didn't allow me to launch a project from India, so I had to fly to the US, open a subsidiary over there, learn from people in the US on how games are made. And then 2019, we launched the game. By launched, I mean we announced the game, we started taking funding on Kickstarter. We were going to ship the next year. Again, Shasan has a lot of writing involved. It has, Shasan initially had 700 unique cards. So we got the writing done. By the time we got the writing done, we were mid-pandemic and manufacturing was shut down in China. Then we waited for manufacturing to kick back open, and by the time we shipped, it was second wave. So Feb of 2021 is when we shipped the game. 3 years after the first idea came to our head,
Mm.
and a few months after that, we announced Azadi, and Azadi turned out to be a much bigger challenge than we anticipated, and is shipping right now. And it's
Mm.
perhaps, if you think Shasan looks beautiful, Azadi is going to be is going to blow your mind.
Wow. Yeah, because I've seen some unboxing videos for like people
Uh,
that have got early copies of it.
yes.
I'm just curious about how you're taking the game to the next level by focusing on certain eras, right? It's Russia, US, South Asia, and and the Middle East. So I think it'll be nice for us to apply that sort of detailed strategic thinking in a particular global context whenever Azadi does come out.
And what we were also trying to do when we picked those was, one, I wanted a, a violent campaign. So uh, we picked the US because unlike India, it was an armed revolution. Then we
Mm.
had India, which was largely a non-violent protest. So we said, okay, let's take another counterpoint, and we went to Russia and said, let's take a look at a communist revolution, a people's revolution, but that's not unlike India or US. They said, okay, let's also take a modern revolution, and we picked uh, Egypt, Tahrir Square, and we were lucky enough to find someone who actually was part of the protests.
Hmm.
And in the core box, the fifth one we picked was, hey, we have gone to the past, we've gone to the present, let's go to the future. And we picked the Martian campaign of 20, that where Mars is fighting for independence from Earth. And then that was the scope that we were going for. And then we said, okay, what other campaigns could we have? So now you have a different flavor of what a revolution could look like. And it
Hmm.
also allowed us to mix these campaigns together. So now you can have an Indian revolution that's violent, an American revolution that uses satyagraha, and it makes complete sense.
Hmm.
Because it's the question is, what if they use their strategy? How what would it be like? And
Hmm.
how would that change the fabric of the nation fundamentally?
Got it.
And
Got
that's
it.
the exploration with Azadi.
That's I think that's really powerful to educate young people about political thinking, Zain. And I think that is
And
such
the
a
power of revolution fundamentally.
true, right? And like when you were playing the games, and because when I played the game, I was
Mhm.
just so fascinated by how people were talking about politics, and I felt comfortable talking about it then. So when you were playing the game, have you overheard, people sharing some interesting perspectives about politics? Maybe you could tell me about some stories you heard in the playthroughs because you've probably been part of like hundreds and thousands of
Thousands, yes. Yeah.
just tell me what you've heard. Like, have you seen someone change their understanding or maybe develop a new
A
perspective?
few. A few. Fun that audiences have found their voices heard across the spectrum. I have had liberals say this game is for them. I have had MAGA hat wearing right wingers say this game completely resonates with what they stand for, because both are valid strategies to win the game. At the same time, I have seen and also heard from people who have written into me how the game has allowed them to do different things. I remember this when we were playtesting the game in a college in Pune pre-launch. There was a young student who was playing the game, and the question that was asked to all of them in the game was about reservation. And everyone thought that being anti-reservation was idealist and being pro-reservation was supremo. And they gave the answer, and the deck it was that wasn't the case. Being pro-reservation was idealist, and that caused a debate. And one kid from the debate said, I come from a backward caste, and my entire life I've been told that there's something wrong with the fact that I take reservations. I thought it was the supremo thing to do, the supremacist thing to do. But this game says it's an idealist thing and makes a good argument for it also.
Hmm.
And that changed not only their opinion, but also the opinion of the people around them.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that the game will only change your opinion to a liberal standpoint. I've seen it, the counterpoint also happen. Another interesting story was this person writes into me saying, uh, hey, my fiance and I played your game in November. And when we played the game, we realized that we had never discussed our politics
Hmm.
until then. And we were going to get married in December.
Hmm.
And we were like, no, our differences are fundamental. And we called our wedding off.
Oh, wow.
And I
Wow.
was like, okay, please tell me this is a good ending. And she went on saying yes. Then we spent the next few months discussing our politics, coming to a common ground on how we will live our life and how our children, when we have them, will be raised. And
Hmm.
now that we have found a common point, uh, we're getting married in June, and thank you so much for that.
Wow.
And SHASN allowed this conversation to happen. The SHASN allowed them to avoid this conflict that would have happened. And so many people have written into me saying, hey, I couldn't discuss politics with XYZ person in my family, and now I can.
Yeah.
And I think that's objective achieved,
True.
honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's the best legacy you can leave
Uh-huh.
when you started it, and you wouldn't have even imagined that, right? In your ink talks, Zain, you mentioned three sort of, first principles of most games, like dexterity, strategy, and luck,
Yeah,
right? And I remember, seeing something where you spoke about how you would play like board games is one thing, but you were a huge like video gamer, right? Growing up, you played a lot of video games. So
yeah,
can you tell me like three or four games that you really enjoyed playing and break them down based on dexterity, strategy, and luck? Like if you
got it.
can,
I won't tell you the game from my childhood. I'll tell you
yeah,
games that I've played
so
throughout my life.
it could be a board game or a video game, whatever.
Yeah. One game that really was amazing for me was a game called This War of Mine. Uh, it's largely, again, the dexterity element in the game is very low because it's a slow paced game. You're base building. By base building, I mean there's civil war going on. But unlike Call of Duty or any other game, you are not a soldier. You are a civilian surviving. So you build your base and you rest in the day, and at night when the war stops, you step out and you try and get food and supplies and wood, whatever you need for
Mm,
fire. And that game, I think, had a profound impact on me because it made me take decisions I otherwise wouldn't have,
mm,
and made me see the consequence of the decisions and what it feels like to live in a war-ridden society. That's one game I would definitely recommend people play. Uh, Another game I would really recommend is Disco Elysium. The director's cut came out last year, which has voice lines for every character, like spoken voice lines. Uh, Again, a great example of how games can be used for very, very deep storytelling.
mm,
And I think that is an amazing tool that games allow you to do in a way that has not yet but will soon transcend the deepest of cinema.
mm.
Yeah, I think those games are something I would start with. Uh, Otherwise, like I play League of Legends regularly, and that's just noise. And I
Yeah,
would recommend that to my enemies.
yeah. And like, I'm looking at the collection you have in your backgrounds, and all the cards I can see
Pokemon
there,
cards,
and
books, yeah,
like like Pokemon or like books. I think these are such like Pokemon was a world I loved inhabiting when I was younger, right? Because
yeah.
I always thought I was Ash Ketchup, and the first thing that always stuck with me is how did these guys figure out what kind of Pokemon they wanted to like pick up? So like if you were a Pokemon trainer, what Pokemon would you have loved to catch?
I don't know,
Like
man. A Mewtwo, maybe.
you want the strongest one right at the start.
It's right there. That one.
Man, that card must be so hard to get, right?
Yes, it is.
Like collector's edition. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I
Like
got the discussion 2017.
wow. So
Yeah,
so you like collecting things, like collecting like books, cards. Is that something you're passionate about?
yeah, definitely. I have a collection of over 500 tabletop games, video games I can't even count, books, Lego sets. You can say Lego set here, Lego set there, Lego set there. Uh,
So
yeah,
like
when you're a child, you're like, when I grow up, I'll do this. And when you grow up, you forget.
yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, which is why like you retain that curiosity even with your work.
It's
Like,
just,
what are
it's just
like two things that you really really like from this collection, Zain? Like that you think you would never like that would be
one
the first thing you would steal if you had a fire
one
in
is
your house.
this. It's a mini museum. It's
Okay.
literally a mini museum. Someone at the Smithsonian made it. It is small artifacts from different parts of the world that, not parts from time history. Everything from piece of Muhammad Ali's punching bag to a piece of the human heart to amino acids from outer space. Just bunch of things that you would find in a museum compressed into something this small.
Wow.
That's definitely something that I would hold on to. Apart from that, mm, well, I have a set of the Rivendell Lego set
Hmm.
signed by Hugo Weaving. So yeah,
Wow.
that maybe.
And yeah, that's more on that later. But
Yeah.
like the Indian gaming industry, Zain, like
Mhm.
I know like you are one of the pioneers of the Indian like gaming tabletop gaming industry. Like,
Mhm.
can you tell me a little bit for someone that's because I've noticed there are so many board game cafes, so many board game communities. Like I stay in Bombay, I've noticed like the community here is really really rich and it's slowly growing. Like, can you
Uh-huh.
throw some light on like what you think the Indian tabletop gaming industry was like and where you think it's going like in the coming years?
Well, what I'm really happy about is that there is a lot more movement in the community. We have, I think, two annual conventions now, MeepleCon and TTOX. We have at least five publishers that I know of that are regularly churning out games. We have a much larger player base than we had 5 years ago. I personally have sold the game to high five digits customers, which shows you how big the community has gotten. Much more awareness about the medium. When you tell people I play board games, they don't think you're a child who plays, uh, you know, games have become much more serious, and it's an evolving scene. What I am really excited about is, can we perhaps create an ecosystem out of India that exports to the world at large? The same way there is a German style of board games and a Japanese style of board games, can an Indian style emerge? What does that look like? And how do we take that to the world? Is what I'm excited about.
Mm. Yeah, because like why not India as a culture, like a culture exporter, right? And I think
1.5 billion people. If you forget India, if you talk South Asia, that's all of us.
now, Zain, I've learned so much about your thoughts on games and your journey as well. Like this is just an open-ended question, like
Sure.
as someone that's really curious, like
Mhm.
if you look back at history, what are
Uh-huh.
some points of history that you think there was the maximum sort of change, or like if you had to transport yourself back into that period, you are sort of curious about that, or would want to know more about based on your learning.
I'm going to again go off on tangent on this.
Yeah,
1 second. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to go off on a tangent again on that.
yeah,
There's no point in history I would rather be in.
got it.
There's a point in the future I would rather be in, but no point in history.
Yeah,
Because when we romanticize the past, it happens because we forget the pains of the past.
yeah,
The past was deeply oppressive for most people.
yeah.
Hunger was widespread. You didn't understand that germs were a thing and medicine was terrible. Rights were non-existent.
Yeah.
But what we have done is, civilization, we have hit inflection points quicker and quicker. The first inflection point was domesticating fire.
Yeah.
From there, it took us hundreds of thousands of years to domesticate, to invent agriculture, and then 100,000 years to settle down, make a city. And Jericho was formed, the first cities, and then proto 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 constitutions like religions formed a few thousand years after that.
Mm,
And in the last 100 years of a civilization, we have gone from inventing flight to reaching Mars. We have gone from understanding that germs exist to being able to manipulate them to augment ourselves. We have
mm,
gone from building the first computer during World War II to building a godlike species very soon called artificial general intelligence.
yeah,
Uh, I didn't think we would live in such exciting times. I thought change would happen a little more slowly than it actually has.
yeah.
The last 10 years, last 20 years of our lives, none of us had phones, and the iPhone launched, and then every other phone launched, and now we all have data on our phone, and now we have AI on our phone, and we have image generators on our phone, and I can talk to you even though I've never met you. And young me didn't think that was going to be so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
So if there's any point in history that I would rather be in, that point is yet to come,
Right.
because I'm so excited about the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, in terms of books and films, like for me, there were two books that really blew my mind, right? One book
Uh-huh.
is called Romanovs. It's about how one family ruled Russia for 300 years. And then the Bolshevik Revolution happened and they went out of power. The
Uh-huh.
second book was Chasing New Horizons, was about how humans first sent a spacecraft to Pluto. And it's by the NASA director that actually ran that mission. So, what were two books that blew your mind? These were two books that blew mine. What was it for you? And it could be
Uh,
more as well, but even one is fine. So,
sure, I have these two books in mind. One was The Selfish Gene
Richard
by
Dawkins.
Dawkins.
Yep.
Again, some life-changing work. A lot of it might seem obvious now, but really changed the way I look at things. Second was Sapolsky's Behave.
Hmm.
Again, tells you about the human condition in a way that no other book does. Why we do what we do.
Mm.
Uh, then there would be Breaking the Spell by Daniel Dennett. I think Daniel Dennett, of the four horsemen of atheism, was the kindest and the most profound.
Mm.
And his work uh, has had a deep impact on my way of looking at the world, looking at religion, and looking at why we believe what we believe in. So those three
Mm.
books I would recommend to anyone in a heartbeat.
Awesome. And like in terms of films, like I just want to tell you, Zain, like an Insignificant Man is one of my top 10 documentaries that I
Thank you.
recommend, because I was someone that was really interested politically, but that film gave me the language to understand the
Mhm.
history of democracy in our country, but in a very engaging way. So, like, is there a film that, you know, it could be documentary, like nonfiction or fiction, that, you think really opened your eyes to a new way of looking at the world?
I think all of Anand Patwardhan's work. If you
Okay.
haven't seen it already, please do. Ram Ke Naam, Father, Son, and Holy War, Jai Bhim, Comrade, Reason. Just watch all of his work. He is an underrated master of our times. He is more profound than we give him credit for.
What are some themes that he normally creates his work on, like larger themes?
Under, just understanding India, religiosity, caste, capitalism. I think if I were to create an equivalence of him in the West, I would have to name multiple people and still not do justice to what Patwardhan's contribution has been to the Indian thought machinery. And I'm really appreciate him. Sorry, and I really appreciate him for doing what he does and building what he has built. Uh, and
Someone from like outside India, like any other filmmaker that
there's
you.
so many. But if you haven't watched While We Watched, please watch that.
Mhm. I've
It's
seen while we watched is it's the Vinay
Ganesh Shukla
Shukla
film.
film.
Yes.
I
Uh,
saw it on movie recently. Amazing, like
Yeah, so
showing
again, the
that.
same team behind An Insignificant Man, Khushbu produced it when I directed it. They were directors of An Insignificant Man, and I keep telling them that they have spoiled documentaries for me because these documentaries are so seamless and so cinematic that when I watch other documentaries, they feel like documentaries, that interviews and voiceovers, and they have really spoiled them for me.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
these are films I would recommend, and I'm biased to, of course, While We Watched An Insignificant Man.
yeah.
But for them is before anything else, I would recommend that. I also love Adam Curtis's video essays. I haven't seen all of them, but the ones I have seen, I love, which is all washed over by Machines of Loving Grace. Again, beautiful essays.
Amazing. Like I will be including all of this in the show notes for the listeners. I will be
Perfect.
including links to Memes's work as well. For the final questions, and like what I wanted to ask you is your vision for your work in the future. Like as humans, we have a limited amount of time on this planet. So like in the next 30 or 40 years, what are some of the large projects like you really want to build? And looking back, what is some points of advice you have for future game designers and filmmakers in the country as well?
The fact that you said that we have a limited time, really, that's something that really bothers me on a daily basis. And Anand and I were discussing that if we look back at the end of our careers, 40 years from now, 30 years, whatever, however long we are allowed to do what we do, it would be it we wouldn't be satisfied, we wouldn't be happy if I had created six hit games and he had created six hit movies. And that's not saying that I'm being greedy, but saying that there's so much more to do. uh, what I really hope that the outcome of this is institution building and ecosystem building that allows more creators to create more things better, that allows creators that otherwise wouldn't have the space to create things more seamlessly and be more brave with their work. If at the end of my career I have in any which way pushed that needle forward, uh, I think it will be a career well spent. Uh, and my advice to young creators or creators getting into the game right now is don't second guess your audience. Don't say, "Oh, the audience wants this." The audience has no idea what they want. No matter what marketing professional might tell you, create things that you would want to consume. That's the only litmus test. If you are one in a million, you have 8,000 customers right there. And let's be honest, none of us are one in a million. So just create things that you want to love, create things that honestly come to you. And it's going to be difficult, but I know you can pull it off.
Awesome. So, on that positive note, we end this episode of Learning Stories. Please follow Mimesis Culture Lab and Zain Memon on Instagram. You can actually understand what they're doing. It's really hard to condense, the variety and diversity of their work in a 1 hour conversation. I will be including all their links in the show notes. Stay tuned for more such episodes from Learning Stories. Until next time, keep learning.